The void had a smell. Nobody mentioned that in the recruitment vids, all gleaming corridors and heroic jawlines, and absolutely no reference to the particular stench of a ship that had died badly. Drek Varro had been breathing that smell for 11 years now, and he still couldn't describe it properly. Copper and ozone mostly, burnt plastic, the ghost of atmosphere that had once kept people alive and was now just another form of debris. He guided the Molly's regret through the expanding field of wreckage, with the careful patience of a man who had learned that haste killed salvagers faster than pirates ever did. The tug was old, ugly, and stubborn, 3 qualities Drek had come to appreciate in both ships and people. Her hull bore the scars of a dozen close calls, patched with whatever materials had been cheap and available, giving her the appearance of a mechanical quilt stitched together by a blind man with questionable taste. Molly herself had loved this ship. Molly herself had died on this ship, bleeding out in the cargo bay while Drek screamed into a comm unit that nobody answered. That was 8 years ago. The bloodstains were gone, cleaned with chemicals that cost him a week's salvage, but sometimes he still saw them when the light hit the deck plates at certain angles. Passive scan complete, the ship's computer announced in a voice Drek had never bothered to customize. It remained factory default neutral, deliberately inhuman, because the alternative was programming it to sound like her, and he wasn't that far gone yet. Vessel identified as Aethyran diplomatic cruiser, cairn of echoes. Crew complement estimated at 340. Life signs detected, 0. 0 confirmed. 0 confirmed. Residual electromagnetic signatures suggest catastrophic reactor failure following kinetic impact. Time since incident, approximately 18 hours. 18 hours. Long enough for anyone in a sealed compartment to run out of air. Long enough for the cold to seep in and finish what the explosion started. Drek had seen enough dead ships to know the arithmetic of survival in vacuum, and the numbers never added up to anything hopeful. He maneuvered the Molly's regret toward the cruiser's midsection, where the hull breach gaped like a wound in dark metal. The cairn of echoes had been beautiful once, in the way Aethyran ships always were, all sweeping curves and crystalline viewports, and that distinctive blue-white hull plating that supposedly sang when you touched it. Drek had never tested that particular rumor. He preferred his interactions with Aethyran technology to be conducted at a professional distance, with cutting tools and cargo nets, and absolutely no singing involved. The war had taught him that much, at least. The war had taught him a lot of things, most of them unpleasant, none of them useful for anything except surviving long enough to learn the next unpleasant thing. His suit sealed with a familiar hiss as he cycled through the airlock, magnetic boots engaging as he stepped into the void between his ship and the dead cruiser. The debris field stretched in all directions, glittering with frozen atmosphere and tumbling fragments of hull plating, and here and there, the distinctive shape of bodies. He didn't look at the bodies. He'd stopped looking at bodies years ago, around the same time he'd stopped sleeping through the night and started keeping a bottle of Terran whiskey within arm's reach of his bunk. The breach in the cairn of echoes was large enough to fly a shuttle through, its edges twisted and blackened by whatever weapon had opened it. Drek pulled himself inside, activating his helmet lamp as the darkness swallowed him. The interior was worse than the exterior. Deck plates buckled, bulkheads collapsed, the elegant Aethyran architecture reduced to abstract sculpture by violence and vacuum. He made his way toward the medical bay because medical bays meant valuable salvage. Stasis units, regenerative compounds, surgical equipment, all of it fetched premium prices on stations that didn't ask questions about provenance. The war had created a thriving market in second-hand military hardware, and Drek had long ago made peace with his role in that economy. Someone was going to strip these ships. It might as well be someone who needed the credits to keep flying. The medical bay doors were jammed half open, twisted in their tracks by structural damage. Drek squeezed through the gap, his lamp cutting through the darkness to reveal. Not empty. Not dead. The woman lay against an overturned surgical bed, her back to a bulkhead, one hand pressed against her side in the universal gesture of someone trying to hold themselves together. Aethyran unmistakably, that blue skin, those elongated ears that swept back from her temples like something out of old Terran fairy tales. Her hair was the color of pale starlight, matted with blood and ash, and something that sparkled faintly in his lamp's beam. Her diplomatic robes, once probably elegant, were torn and soaked with fluids he didn't want to identify. She was looking at him with silver-gray eyes that held absolutely no hope and absolutely no surrender. "Human," she said, and the word sounded like a death sentence. Drek didn't move. His hand didn't go to the pistol on his hip, though every instinct screamed at him to draw, to fire, to eliminate the threat before it eliminated him. 11 years of war had carved those instincts deep into his nervous system, written them in the language of survival and fear. But she was injured. Badly, from the look of it, something protruded from her lower back, a jagged piece of debris that glinted wetly in his lamp light. And her hand, the one that should have been raised to destroy him with the psychic abilities her species was famous for, remained pressed against her side, trembling with the effort of staying conscious. "Yeah," Drek said finally. "Human. You want to kill me now, or should we wait until you've finished bleeding out? I'm flexible on timing." The joke fell flat in the frozen air between them. Aethyrans weren't known for their appreciation of human humor. Something about cultural incompatibility, or possibly the fact that humans had spent the last decade bombing their colonies. Her eyes narrowed. "Your species finds everything amusing. Destruction, suffering, the deaths of worlds." "Not everything. I've never found tax codes particularly funny." He remained still, hands visible, voice deliberately calm. "How bad is it? Why do you care?" "Honestly, I'm not sure I do. But I'm asking anyway, which probably means something." She stared at him for a long moment. This human who had appeared in her tomb like a specter from her nightmares. This representative of the species that had burned everything she loved. Her silver eyes searched his face for cruelty, for deception, for the violence that she had learned to expect from his kind. Whatever she found there, it made her close her eyes briefly. "There is shrapnel in my lower back," she said quietly. 15 centimeters approximately. "It has damaged my secondary respiratory lattice. I am losing blood faster than my system can compensate." A pause. "I will be dead within 2 hours without intervention." Drek absorbed this information with the careful neutrality of a man calculating odds. A live Aethyran was worth more than a dead one. That was true. Bounties, prisoner exchanges, intelligence value, the mercenary calculus of war. But that wasn't why he stepped forward instead of backward. "I'm going to approach you," he said. "Slowly. My hands are going to stay where you can see them. If your psychic thing still works, I'd appreciate you not liquefying my brain until I've had a chance to look at the wound." "My implant is damaged." Her voice carried something that might have been shame. "I am defenseless." "Great, that makes 2 of us." He moved toward her, step by careful step, his lamp illuminating more details with each meter. The debris in her back, the faint luminescence beneath her skin pulsing weakly with her heartbeat, the way her ears, those long, elegant ears, lay flat against her skull in an expression he couldn't read. He knelt beside her, close enough to touch, close enough to kill. "I'm Drek," he said. "Drek Varro, salvage operative currently having second thoughts about his career choices." Sylis Veth, her voice was barely a whisper now. Third voice of the diplomatic choir. "That's a lot of title for someone bleeding on the floor." "We are a formal people." "Yeah, I've noticed." He leaned closer, examining the wound, and tried very hard not to think about what he was about to attempt. "All right, Sylis Veth, third voice of titles I can't pronounce. Let's see if I can keep you alive long enough to regret not killing me when you had the chance." Outside the viewport, visible through a crack in the medical bay's hull, the wreckage of 2 fleets drifted in silence. Human ships and Aethyran vessels, locked together in death, burning their last fires into the uncaring dark. Sylis Veth had survived the unsurvivable before. This was not a boast or a comfort. It was simply a fact she had learned to carry, the way one carries a scar or a name or the memory of fire. Her colony world, Aethyran, had burned when she was 19 standard years old. Human soldiers had descended from human ships with human weapons, and they had done what humans did best. They had destroyed something beautiful because they could, because it was there, because the mathematics of war demanded payment in ash and grief. She had crawled through the ruins of her family's meditation garden with a broken spine, dragging herself over crystalline fragments that had once been her mother's prayer sculptures. She had reached the refugee transport through sheer refusal to die, through a stubbornness that her instructors at the diplomatic academy would later call problematic, and her therapists would call dissociation. She had spent 3 years learning to walk again in a rehabilitation station that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, and the quiet desperation of people who had lost everything except their heartbeats. She had survived. It was what she did. It was all she knew how to do. But survival had never arrived wearing a human face and speaking in a voice that carried exhaustion instead of hatred. The human, Drek, he had called himself, a name that sounded like something being dropped, knelt beside her with his hands visible and his expression carefully neutral. He was not what she had expected. Human soldiers were sharp-edged and predatory, their eyes hungry with the violence their species seemed to crave. This one looked tired. His face carried the geography of hard years. Lines around his eyes, a scar across his jaw, the particular weathering of someone who had spent too long breathing recycled air in ships that were older than their problems. "I need to see the wound," he said, "which means I need to touch you. I'm asking permission because I'm not an animal, whatever your propaganda vids say about us." "Your propaganda vids say we drink the blood of human children," Sylis replied, the words coming automatically, defensively. "Yours are more creative than ours. We've always been good at fiction." He hadn't moved, still waiting. Permission. She closed her eyes. The pain in her back pulsed with each heartbeat, a rhythm of damage that she could feel spreading through her secondary respiratory lattice. Without intervention, the crystalline structures would begin to fragment. Without intervention, she would drown in her own fluid as her organs lost cohesion. She had perhaps 2 hours, perhaps less. "Granted," she whispered. His hands were warm through her torn robes, warmer than she expected, than she remembered human touch being. The last time a human had touched her, it had been a soldier dragging her out of rubble, not gently, not with care, just efficiently clearing debris from a battlefield that had once been her home. This was different. This touch carried hesitation, uncertainty, a conscious gentleness that seemed almost painful in its deliberateness. "Okay," Drek said slowly. "That's definitely shrapnel. 15 centimeters, you said." "Approximately. I cannot see it. I am estimating based on the damage I can feel." "Right, and this." His fingers moved near her spine, not touching the wound itself, just mapping its edges. "This glowing stuff under your skin, that's normal. It is my organ structure. Aethyran internal systems are crystalline in nature, bioluminescent, arranged in geometric lattices." She forced the clinical words out past the pain. "They are also extremely fragile by human standards. Your grip strength alone could shatter my ribs." "My grip strength." The average human hand can exert 60 kilograms of pressure. Aethyran bones crack at 40. She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. "So congratulations, you could kill me by being affectionate." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, but something adjacent to it. Something that lived in the neighborhood of dark humor and had learned to survive there. "I haven't been affectionate with anyone in 8 years. You're probably safe." "That is not as reassuring as you seem to believe." "Yeah, well, I'm not a reassuring person." He sat back on his heels, studying the wound with an intensity that suggested he was calculating something she couldn't see. "The shrapnel needs to come out, but if I just pull it, I'm going to do more damage. Those lattice structures you mentioned, they're wrapped around the debris. She had not expected him to understand so quickly. Human medicine was brutal by Aethyran standards, all cutting and forcing, and the application of blunt solutions to delicate problems. Yet this human was asking questions, was thinking, was treating her physiology as a puzzle rather than an obstacle. Yes, she said, the crystalline matrix will have begun to incorporate the foreign object. Rapid removal will cause fragmentation and internal hemorrhaging. So I need to go slow, agonizingly slow. Your species has no concept of the word, I suspect. You move through the universe like it owes you haste. We live shorter lives than you do. We're motivated. He was already reaching for the emergency kit on his belt, pulling out tools that looked crude and human and entirely inadequate for the task ahead. All right. You're going to have to guide me through this. Tell me exactly where to put my hands, how much pressure is safe, when to stop. Can you do that? She stared at him. The question beneath the question was obvious. Could she trust a human with her survival? Could she place her life in the hands of a species that had burned her world, killed her family, turned her people into refugees and statistics and acceptable losses? Her psionic implant was dark and dead behind her left ear. She could feel its absence like a missing limb, the crystalline node that should have allowed her to manage her own pain, to sedate herself, to defend against threats with the mental disciplines her kind had developed over millennia. Without it, she was helpless. Without it, she could not stop him if he decided to finish what the war had started. She was going to have to trust a human. The thought tasted like ash. I can guide you, she said finally. But you must understand what you are asking. Aethyran pain response is different from human pain response. We do not scream because screaming is an acknowledgement of weakness. We do not flinch because flinching risks shattering. I will be conscious throughout the procedure, and I will be in agony, and I will show you none of it because that is what I was taught to do. That sounds healthy. It sounds like survival. Your people taught us the difference. He was quiet for a moment, and she saw something move behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly, but something related to it, something that lived in the same emotional territory. Yeah, he said softly, I guess we did. He positioned himself beside her, tools arranged within reach, his face settling into an expression of focused concentration that transformed his features into something almost careful, almost kind. Whenever you're ready. I will never be ready. Begin anyway. His hands moved toward her back, and Sylis Veth closed her eyes and began to count her breaths in the old language of her mother's prayers. And somewhere in the frozen darkness beyond the viewport, the wreckage of two fleets continued its slow, silent expansion into the uncaring void. The first touch was fire. Sylis felt his fingers make contact with the edges of the wound, and her crystalline lattices screamed in frequencies that human ears could never detect. She did not flinch. She did not cry out. She counted, 1, 2, 3, in the language of her dead mother, the syllables forming a bridge between the person she had been and the person she was forcing herself to remain. I'm going to rotate the fragment, Drek said, his voice low and steady, an anchor in the storm of sensation. Counterclockwise, tell me if I need to stop. You need to stop. His hands froze, already. No, I am simply stating an ongoing truth. You will always need to stop. You will not be able to continue. She heard him exhale, a short, sharp sound that might have been frustration or might have been something darker, something that tasted of helplessness. His fingers moved again, and the world became very small and very white, reduced to the point where metal met flesh met crystal. Talk to me, she said through gritted teeth. Distract me. Tell me something irrelevant. Irrelevant. Anything. I do not care about the content. I need your voice as a reference point, or I will lose consciousness, and if I lose consciousness, I cannot guide you, and if I cannot guide you, you will kill me. So talk. Drek was quiet for a moment, his hands maintaining their glacial rotation of the shrapnel. When he spoke, His voice carried the awkward cadence of someone unused to sharing. "This ship," he said, "the Molly's Regret. I named it after someone. Your mate, partner, business partner, also other things, but we never figured out what to call the other things. Another millimeter of rotation, another surge of agony that Sylis translated into counted breaths. She was better than me. Better at salvage, better at negotiation, better at being a person. I was the muscle, she was everything else. She died 8 years ago, cargo bay of this ship. Some pirates decided our haul was worth more than our lives, and Molly decided our lives were worth more than the haul, and she was wrong about the math but right about the principle." His voice had gone flat, mechanical, reciting facts rather than reliving them. "I've been flying alone since then. Easier that way. No one else to lose." Sylis understood this logic. She had applied it to herself for years. The deliberate isolation, the careful maintenance of distance, the refusal to allow new attachments to form in the spaces where old ones had been torn away. Loneliness as a survival strategy. That works so far. It is not working, it is merely persisting. There is a difference. That's very philosophical for someone with a piece of metal in her spine. My people are a philosophical species. We contemplate the nature of existence while bleeding. It passes the time. She felt the shrapnel shift, felt her crystalline structures groan in protest, and forced her voice to remain steady. "Slower. You are moving too quickly." "This is slow. This is the slowest I've ever done anything." "Then you have never done anything slowly. Adjust." He adjusted. The rotation became imperceptible, a movement measured in fractions of fractions, and Sylis found herself focusing on his breathing rather than her own. In and out, steady and controlled, the rhythm of someone who had learned to manage fear through discipline rather than elimination. "The shrapnel is caught on something," Drek said after what felt like hours. "Some kind of structure, glowing, pulsing. My secondary respiratory lattice. It filters toxins from my bloodstream and oxygenates my crystalline organs. Without it, I will suffocate internally within minutes." "Great, no pressure." "There is enormous pressure. That is precisely the problem." She heard something that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. "You're funnier when you're dying. Anyone ever tell you that?" "No one has ever been present for my dying. You are the first." "Lucky me." The work continued. Sylis guided him through the labyrinth of her internal architecture, the placement of nodes and channels and crystalline structures that pulsed with bioluminescence, each one essential, each one fragile, each one a single mistake away from catastrophic failure. Human medicine had no framework for this. Human hands had never been designed for this. And yet Drek moved with a precision that surprised her, that contradicted everything she had learned about his species and their brutal approach to healing. "You are not what I expected," she said during a pause, while he adjusted his grip and she gathered the strength to continue. "What did you expect? Cruelty, efficiency without care. The treatment of my body as a mechanism rather than a person. I've met those humans, I've worked with them, I've been those humans on bad days. The shrapnel rotated another fraction of a degree, but today's not a bad day. Today's just a weird day. You find this situation weird. I find this situation completely insane. I'm performing surgery on an alien diplomat in a dead ship in the middle of a debris field, using tools designed for welding hull plating, while her species and my species are presumably still trying to kill each other somewhere out there." He paused. "Yeah, weird covers it. We are enemies. Are we right now?" Sylis considered the question. Her people had a concept, Velthani, the moment between moments, the space where normal rules dissolved and new possibilities emerged. She had always considered it a philosophical abstraction, a meditation focus rather than a practical reality. "No," she admitted. "Right now we are something else. I do not have a word for it. In human language, we'd call it figuring it out. It's not elegant, but it's honest." The shrapnel moved again, and Sylis felt the world contract to a single point of fire and focus. She was dimly aware of sounds, her own controlled breathing, his steady hands, the creak of the damaged ship settling around them. The viewport showed stars and wreckage, an abstract painting of violence rendered in debris and frozen light. "Almost there," Drek said, and his voice carried something she hadn't heard before, hope, perhaps, or its exhausted cousin, determination. "One more rotation and I think I can pull it free." Slowly. "I know." Agonizingly slowly. "I know. Your species has no concept of." "I know." His hands moved with infinite care, and Sylis felt the shrapnel release its grip on her crystalline structures, felt the terrible pressure begin to ease, felt something that might have been survival begin to take shape in the ruins of her expectations. "Now," she whispered, "pull now." And he did. She woke to the sound of something mechanical being insulted in creative terms. Consciousness returned in fragments, first the awareness of pain, reduced now to a persistent ache rather than the screaming fire of before. Then the sensation of pressure against her back, bandages wrapped with more care than skill. Then, finally, the voice of a human threatening violence against what appeared to be a food synthesizer. "I swear to every god I don't believe in," Drek was saying somewhere to her left. "If you produce one more nutrient block that tastes like recycled boot leather, I will personally disassemble you and sell your components to a scrap dealer who specializes in humiliating useless machinery." Sylis opened her eyes. The medical bay looked different in the dim emergency lighting, less like a tomb, more like a shelter. Someone had cleared the debris from the immediate area, arranged salvaged supplies in neat rows, created a small circle of order in the surrounding chaos. She was lying on a makeshift bed constructed from thermal blankets and what appeared to be pieces of uniform fabric. His uniform fabric, she realized. The jacket he had been wearing was gone, torn into the bandages that wrapped her torso. Drek stood before a wall-mounted synthesizer unit, his back to her, apparently engaged in a battle of wills with the machine. His undershirt was stained with her blood, that distinctive blue-silver that marked Aethyran physiology. He looked smaller without the jacket, more human somehow, the muscles of his shoulders carrying a tension that spoke of exhaustion held at bay through pure stubbornness. "The synthesizer does not respond to threats," she said, and her voice came out rougher than she intended, scraped raw by hours of controlled breathing and suppressed screams. He turned sharply and something in his expression shifted, relief perhaps or something adjacent to it. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like someone removed a piece of metal from my spine, using tools designed for welding." "So accurate then." He crossed to her, kneeling beside the makeshift bed with a container in his hands. "I've been trying to make something you can eat. Your people's ration packages had names and ceremonies attached. I just aimed for probably not poisonous." She accepted the container, examined its contents. The nutrient paste inside was vaguely purple and smelled of nothing recognizable. What was this supposed to be? The package said, "Morning's first kindness." I have no idea what that means, but it sounded nice. Sylis almost smiled. Almost. "It is a traditional diplomatic breakfast. We eat food that carries meaning, that reminds us of purpose and home." "Does this remind you of home?" She tasted it. The flavor was wrong, too synthetic, too processed, stripped of the subtle harmonics that Aethyran food preparation cultivated over hours of careful attention. But beneath the wrongness there was something familiar, a ghost of fruit that might have grown in crystalline soil, a memory of mornings before the war. "Yes," she said quietly, "in a way it does." Drek settled onto the deck beside her, maintaining a careful distance that she recognized as deliberate, close enough to assist, far enough to respect. Human social calibration, she thought. They were not as oblivious to such things as her people believed. How long was I unconscious? 6 hours, give or take. He gestured vaguely at her torso. "Your glowing bits dimmed for a while. I thought I'd killed you. Then they started pulsing again, and I figured that was probably good." My crystalline structures entered regenerative stasis. It is a natural response to severe trauma. She looked down at herself, at the bandages wrapped with obvious inexperience but genuine care. You stayed. Where else was I going to go? Your ship you could have left, taken whatever salvage you came for. No one would have known. He was quiet for a moment, and she watched something move behind his eyes, an internal debate perhaps between the person he had been and the person he was choosing to be. Molly would have known. I would have known. That's two people too many. Molly is dead. Yeah, but I still hear her voice sometimes, usually when I'm about to do something stupid or selfish. He shrugged, the gesture deliberately casual. She had opinions. They didn't stop just because she did. Sylis understood this. Her mother had been dead for 12 years, and she still heard her voice in moments of crisis, guiding, chiding, loving in that fierce Aethyran way that demanded excellence as an expression of affection. The dead did not leave. They simply changed their methods of communication. Tell me about her, Sylis said. Molly. Drek looked surprised. Why? Because you saved my life, and I do not know how to acknowledge that debt, and learning about the person who shaped you seems like a beginning. He considered this for a long moment. Then he leaned back against the bulkhead, his eyes finding the viewport and the field of wreckage beyond. She laughed too loud, he said finally, at everything. Terrible jokes, good jokes, situations that were definitely not funny. First time I met her, she was laughing at a customs officer who was threatening to impound her ship. He was furious. She was delighted. I fell in love with her somewhere between the threats and the giggling. Your people love quickly. We love constantly. It's a design flaw. We attach ourselves to people and things and ideas without considering the consequences, and then we're devastated when we lose them, and then we do it again anyway. He smiled, but it was a sad smile, weathered by years of loss. Molly used to say that human hearts were badly engineered. Too much capacity, not enough durability. Aethyran hearts are crystalline, Sylis said. They do not break, they shatter. The pieces cannot be reassembled. That sounds worse. It is different, neither better nor worse, simply different. They sat in silence for a while, the two of them, surrounded by the wreckage of their people's hatred. Outside the viewport, a human destroyer drifted past, its hull breached, its lights dark, its crew certainly dead. Sylis watched it pass and felt nothing. She had used up her grief years ago, spent it all on Aethyran and her family and the crystalline trees that would never sing again. I have a question, Drek said eventually, and you can tell me to go to hell if it's too personal. Ask. Your psionic implant, the one that's damaged, what does it actually do? Sylis touched the space behind her left ear, where the crystalline node sat dark and silent against her skull. It amplifies natural Aethyran psychic abilities, telepathy, telekinesis, emotional projection. With a functioning implant, I could sedate myself, manage my own pain, defend against physical threats. She paused. I could kill you with a thought if I chose. Your brain would simply stop functioning. That's terrifying. It is also a burden. Feeling the emotions of others, knowing their fears, their hatreds, their secret griefs. During the war, I felt human soldiers die. I felt their terror and confusion and the desperate love they held for people they would never see again. She looked at him directly. Your species is not as different from mine as we pretend. Drek absorbed this in silence. Then he said, I'm glad it's broken. Because you fear what I might do to you. Because you don't have to feel what I'm feeling right now. It's complicated enough without an audience. Sylis studied him, this human who had saved her life, who sat beside her in the ruins of a war neither of them had wanted, who spoke of love and loss with the same exhausted honesty. She thought of her mother's prayers, of the crystalline garden that would never grow again, of the name she had carried since birth and shared with no one since her world burned. Aethyran or Sylis Veth, she said quietly. Drek blinked. What? My true name, not Sylis Veth, the diplomatic designation. Aethyran or Sylis Veth, it means hope born from stone. My mother gave it to me. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That's a lot of syllables. It is a lot of meaning. But is there a short version?" She hesitated. The short version was intimate, a childhood name, a family name, a name that carried the weight of love and memory and everything she had lost. To share it was to offer a piece of herself that she had guarded jealously for over a decade. "Thea," she said. "When I was small, my mother called me Thea." Drek nodded slowly, as if receiving something precious and fragile. "Okay, Thea." He paused. "I'm just Drek. There's no long version. My mother wasn't the ceremonial type." Something moved in her chest. Not pain, not fear, but something warmer and more frightening than either. Something that felt like the first green shoot pushing through ash-covered soil. "Just Drek," she repeated. "It suits you." And somewhere in the darkness, far beyond the viewport, a distress beacon began to pulse. The beacon's pulse filled the silence between them, a rhythmic electronic heartbeat that promised rescue and threatened everything they had built in the ruins of the medical bay. Drek stared at the console he had repaired during the hours while Sylis slept, its lights now blinking with the steady confirmation of a signal broadcasting into the void. He had fixed it because she needed help he could not provide. Real medical facilities, real doctors, real treatment for wounds that his salvage tools and desperate care could only temporarily address. He had fixed it knowing what it meant. "Someone will come," Sylis said from her makeshift bed, her voice carrying the weight of understanding. "Yeah. You activated it on both frequencies, human and Aethyran. But I couldn't figure out how to limit it." He paused, and something almost like a smile crossed his weathered features. "Also, I didn't try very hard." She watched him, this human who had saved her life, who had torn his own jacket into bandages, who had threatened a food synthesizer on her behalf and spoken of love and loss with the honesty of someone who had stopped pretending years ago. The emergency lighting cast shadows across his face, emphasizing the exhaustion he had been fighting since she first opened her eyes to find him kneeling in the darkness. "They will execute you," she said quietly. "If my people arrive first, human salvagers in Aethyran space on an Aethyran military vessel. There are no exceptions to this law." "I know. You activated the beacon anyway. You needed help I can't give you, real medicine. Doctors who know what they're doing with crystalline organs and glowing lattices." He shrugged, the gesture carrying more weight than its casual execution suggested. "I've been living on borrowed time since Molly died. Figured I'd spend some of it on something worthwhile." Sylis felt her crystalline heart pulse with something she could not name, an emotion that existed in the space between gratitude and grief, between recognition and resistance. "You value your life so little. I value it exactly as much as it's worth, which, according to the current market, isn't much." He turned from the console, meeting her eyes with a directness that felt almost Aethyran in its intensity. "What about you? If your people arrive, you'll be safe. Medical treatment, diplomatic extraction, the whole ceremonial rescue package. And you will be taken, interrogated, executed. That's the math." She was silent for a moment, calculating outcomes with the precision her diplomatic training demanded. Then she said, "No." Drek raised an eyebrow. "No. If my people arrive first, I will invoke diplomatic privilege. You saved the life of a third voice. You will be classified as a protected asset, remanded to my custody." Her voice carried the formal cadence of legal recitation, but beneath it ran something warmer, something that defied the coldness of diplomatic procedure. "You will not be executed. I will not permit it. Can you actually do that? I am third voice of the diplomatic choir. I can do many things that would surprise you." She shifted on the bed, wincing as her regenerating crystalline structures protested the movement. "Though perhaps not physical things. Not yet. And if my people arrive first?" The question hung between them like debris in the void. Sylis knew what happened to Aethyran prisoners in human custody. The interrogations that relied on their crystalline physiology's vulnerability to pressure and vibration. the techniques that humans considered routine and Aethyrans experienced as systematic destruction. She had reviewed the intelligence reports. She had seen the aftermath. "Then I am a diplomatic prisoner," she said carefully, "to be interrogated, eventually exchanged. That's the official version." "Yes." Drek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the same flatness she had heard when he spoke of Molly, the deliberate suppression of emotion that humans used to discuss unbearable things. "I won't let that happen. You may not have a choice." "There's always a choice." He crossed to her, lowering himself to sit on the deck beside her bed, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I've done things I'm not proud of. During the war, before the war, after I stopped pretending the war was something I believed in. But I've never handed someone over to be destroyed. I'm not starting with you." "Thea." "What?" "You called me Sylis, but I gave you my true name. If we are discussing whether you will risk your life to protect mine, you should use it." Something shifted in his expression, a softening perhaps, or a hardening of resolve. "I won't let them hurt you, Thea. Whatever that costs." She reached out and touched his hand. The contact was electric, her crystalline skin against his calloused human fingers, two physiologies that had never been designed to interact with gentleness. He did not pull away. Neither did she. "We are enemies," she said softly. "Our peoples have been killing each other for 11 years. Everything I was taught says I should hate you." "Do you?" "No." The admission felt like releasing a breath she had been holding since Veth and her burned. "I tried. When I first saw you in the darkness, I wanted to hate you. It would have been simpler, cleaner. But you knelt beside me and made jokes about timing, and you asked permission before you touched me, and you spoke of a woman you loved with such grief that I could not see a monster anymore. Only a person. Only someone as broken and surviving as I am. I'm not sure that's a compliment. It is the highest compliment my people can offer, to be seen as we truly are, rather than as symbols or enemies or abstractions." She squeezed his fingers gently, carefully, mindful of the strength differential that meant she could not afford carelessness. "You saw me, Drek, not an Aethyran, not a diplomat me." "Thea," he said quietly, "yes. Look out the viewport." She turned her head, following his gaze toward the cracked window that revealed the debris field beyond. For a moment, she saw only what she had seen for hours: wreckage and frozen atmosphere, and the scattered remnants of two fleets that had destroyed each other in the final spasm of a war that neither side had truly wanted. Then she saw the ships, two vessels emerging from the darkness, their running lights bright against the void. One was human, a patrol corvette, its angular hull marked with the insignia of the Terran Recovery Corps. The other was Aethyran, a diplomatic courier, its crystalline surfaces catching starlight in patterns that made her chest ache with recognition. Both approaching. Both responding to the beacon that promised them either a survivor or a corpse. "Well," Drek said with the dark humor that she was beginning to understand as his primary coping mechanism, "this is going to be interesting." "Interesting is one word for it." "What word would you use?" Sylis watched the ships draw closer. Her people and his people, enemies who had finally stopped fighting for reasons neither she nor Drek yet knew. Somewhere in the command structures of both vessels, decisions were being made about the signal they had detected, the survivors they might find, the protocols that would govern first contact in the aftermath of battle. "Unprecedented," she said finally. "I would call it unprecedented." Drek's hand remained in hers, warm, calloused, human. The hand that had removed shrapnel from her spine with agonizing care. The hand that had bandaged her wounds with strips of his own clothing. The hand that belonged to a man who had chosen to save her when walking away would have been so much simpler. "Whatever happens next," she said, "I want you to know something." "Yeah." My mother used to say that hope was the most Aethyran of virtues, that our crystalline hearts were built to hold it even when everything else shattered around us. She turned to look at him directly, silver eyes meeting human brown. "I thought she was wrong. I thought hope was a weakness that the universe would punish. But you, she stopped, searching for words in a language that was not her own. You held my broken body together with your human hands, and you made me believe that survival might mean more than simply not dying. That is a gift I do not know how to repay. You gave me your name, Drek said quietly. The real one, that's not nothing. No, it is not nothing. The ships were close enough now that she could see their details. The crystalline spires of the Aethyran courier, the practical bulk of the human corvette. Both slowing. Both preparing to dock. Both carrying futures that she and Drek could not yet imagine. Ready? He asked. Sylis Veth, third voice of the diplomatic choir, holder of the true name Aethyran or Sylis Veth, survivor of Aethyran and of a war that had ended without her knowledge, squeezed the hand of the human who had saved her life. Together, she said, and together they waited for what came next.